Whether you're looking for answers to specific life questions or simply hoping to become the best version of you possible, welcome to the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast, where we offer insight, information, and strategies based upon research and years of practice as psychologists. So sit back, have a listen, and get connected with our hosts, Dr. Berney and Dr. Richard Marshall. Welcome back. Today we're going to talk about autism in schools, and we're really only going to start talking about autism in schools because as we were putting this together, we realized we need to talk a lot more about this, and so we're going to include it in our treatment podcast tomorrow.
Because for all intents and purposes, it's in a school setting where most of the interventions are going to take place. When we work with kids, we're working with them in the home and in school. Right. So we'll talk about school issues today. But when we talk about what we actually do in schools, that really fits better under the treatment part, which we're going to do tomorrow, correct?
Tomorrow, right?
Yeah. Tomorrow?
Yeah.
Oh, that's right, tomorrow. I get all confused by dates and other things.
Time is
dates,
so complex.
Names.
With what we're going to talk about today is really going to pull together some of the things we've talked about over the course of the week so far, because of the challenges that kids with autism spectrum disorder experience at school, and some of the challenges that schools, have in trying to provide services for children with autism spectrum disorder.
That's right. And
because the spectrum is so big
that's
it's having a autism spectrum classroom can have anything from students who are gifted to students who are nonverbal.
And that's one of the problems we're going to run into. I like the spectrum that DSM-5 gives us.
It's taken some time to get used to it, to come
around
to it.
It has really changed everything.
Right.
Okay, because before we had these 5 sort of diagnoses, but we really only used 2 of them. I mean, the others were there, but how often did you see? I think I saw Rets twice in 15 years.
I think 3 were common, because autism, Aspergers, and PDD and OS.
Sure.
So, which is sort of the catch-all.
I'm not sure, but
it
gives me a safety valve.
But when it comes to that, DSM-5, the spectrum didn't really change much. It just sort of formalized what we're already articulating, because not anyone, I shouldn't overgeneralize, but most of the time when people said Asperger's, what did they say?
Mild.
High-functioning autism.
High-functioning autism.
And so by definition, that's sort of on the upper end of the autism spectrum. And so,
So while on the one hand we like the spectrum from a clinical point of view, it does complicate things in a school setting.
Right.
And it complicates things for parents.
Absolutely.
This is a great article.
From Spectrum News.
Spectrum News, right? By John McLaughlin, I think is his name. And he's a guy who knows his way around this field. He's been a researcher and a teacher and a college professor for the past 40 years.
Right.
He must be old.
He must be. Hopefully he's not listening to this then.
Probably in his 60s. Well, hey, John, give me a call.
But he works in 27 different states. I mean, he's very involved in this.
Well,
field.
I mention his age because you always tease me about being old. I'm only in my 40s, and you always tease me about that. Anyway,
this is your second time in the 40s, right?
That's a good one. Yeah, I'm going through the 40s again. Okay, and he comes up. He said, There's a certain theme that he has running through the entire article. What he's talking about mainly is why there aren't more autism programs in public schools. And that's one of the questions everybody asks is there an autism program? Well, it's hard to have an autism program when you have a spectrum.
Right.
Okay, because a program that you would set up for children with multiple needs and severe deficits and many functional deficits would be very different from a program that you would use for Temple Grandin. We talked about Temple Grandin the other day, who's high functioning. It's not that she's high functioning, there just aren't a lot of issues. She may have some of the characteristics, but she has at least average intellectual abilities. She's able to master basic academic skills at a high school level. And so that's a very different program.
Yeah, and that's sort of thinking about her skills very basic. I mean,
Right.
clearly she has advanced degrees and all of that
Sure.
kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So she's a smart person. But as we talked about the other day, when you have strong verbal skills and you have strong cognitive skills, as we evaluate, based upon how we evaluate cognitive skills, it's the probability of you doing well increases,
Right.
because those are the things that we know you need to. And I have patients who are in various locations on the spectrum, some of whom are in college classes in high school,
Right.
and others who are struggling to read at a third grade level, even though they are in high school. All of them are verbal because
That's right.
those who are not verbal wouldn't come to the type of therapy and treatment that we offer. But the spectrum is broad.
Because the spectrum is so broad, from mild to severe, it's hard to talk about a program for children with autism. Okay, and so that's obstacle number one. But in the beginning of this article, he says that what's needed. He said there are, regardless of what else we do, all children with autism have 5 basic needs. One is they need calm rather than chaos.
Right.
Kids with autism, mild to severe, don't do well in chaotic environments where there's a bunch of talking and yelling and jostling about and multiple conversations going on. That chaos is unnerving. They benefit from one-on-one. They need to be kept organized. They need to be cued and prompted what to do. They need aides and therapists.
Right.
They all benefit from therapy, and they all need some assistance to manage a regular classroom setting. They also need individualized lessons because their needs are going to be different, and even the lessons for each child with autism those lessons are probably going to differ from student to student.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then finally, they need an opportunity to regroup and recollect and to collect themselves, because kids with autism tend to unravel in these environments, and they need a place to go to get calm again, to sort of collect themselves, then come back in. So you have these sort of common themes, common needs that kids with autism spectrum disorder have. But it's hard to find that in one place.
Right.
It's hard to satisfy those. So these are the things that need to be incorporated generally. But the reason they're rare, the reason programs are rare, is because although we've talked about IDEIA all week long, about the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. The reason that autism programs are rare is, number one, because of the spectrum, but number two, the federal government says in IDEA you must provide an education.
Right.
It doesn't tell you what you have to do.
Right.
To provide that education.
Right.
You have
or what education is.
That's right. That is it educational opportunity.
Right.
And this is one of the huge sticking points with special education law. The school has to provide the opportunity. They can't guarantee an education.
Right.
And that's a huge difference, even in regular education.
Yeah.
I have to provide an opportunity.
Right.
I can't guarantee that your child is going to benefit from that opportunity. Go ahead.
You're working to open a can of worms that's...
No, I'm not.
Because this is exactly the issue of, this is why No Child Left Behind could not succeed. This is why, a lot of those programs that say, that work to guarantee all students performing at a particular level, or all students are going to achieve a particular thing.
Right.
That's why those programs will not succeed, because you can offer the opportunity.
That's all you're offering.
That's all you can do.
Right. You have educational opportunity.
Right.
There's no way to guarantee. An IEP doesn't guarantee anything except opportunity.
Right.
We'll make accommodations, but only for opportunity. Okay. So that's one thing. We're not saying, children with ADHD have to have some accommodations so they have equal opportunity.
Right.
But we can't guarantee success. Okay. So that's one thing, is the federal government doesn't tell us this is what you have to do for children with autism.
Right.
And as a result of that, many districts, if you have dedicated staff in a dedicated district, they will provide what children need.
Right.
But there's nobody telling them that they must provide it.
Right.
You must provide any specific thing. And so he has a word that I've never seen before, de minimis.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, it's an interesting word. He said they do the absolute load, de, D-E, minimis, and M-I-N-I-M-I-S, and they provide just the minimum opportunities for these children. So one problem is the law doesn't spell out what should be provided. Second problem is the most effective interventions occur early, after 18 or 24 months.
Right.
We don't have that's where the gap is in service delivery.
And you know, if we look at the way that autism spectrum disorder progresses, it almost makes sense that that's the case, because as we talked about the other day, you know, early on, the repertoire of behaviors that we're expecting a person to perform are relatively few.
Right.
As the person gets older, that behavioral those behavioral expectations grow exponentially.
Right.
So it's easy to provide, well, quote unquote easier to provide services when the behaviors that you're looking at and trying to teach are relatively few.
Right.
But as if a student's not reading, why is a student not reading?
Right.
Well, there could, if the person is 3 years old, it's easy. It's because he's 3 years old.
Hasn't been taught yet.
If the person is 8 years old, 9 years old, 10 years old, the reason that they're not reading could be hundreds of reasons why the person is not reading.
That's right.
And so to provide a specific intervention for not just that student, but then say we're going to create a whole program for students who aren't reading, that is extremely complicated.
I worked in a district one time.
And autism is much more complicated than reading.
And it's more complicated than reading.
Right.
It's far more complicated. So we don't have the early intervention programs.
Right.
And that creates two problems. One is that you're not giving kids interventions early enough when the brain is changing so rapidly. You know, the brain goes through this massive change at about age 2.5 to 7 or 8. And that's the time when you want to do your interventions. The other thing that happens is when a child has these negative behaviors, temper tantrums, screaming, no eye contact, if they don't get early intervention, those behaviors concretize. They become, the brain gets good at what it does repeatedly.
That's a good word.
I like that word.
Concretize.
And they become set in stone, because if a child is having temper tantrums at 18 months and 24 months and 36 months, and by the age of 5 has had 300 temper tantrums, they're going to be very good at having temper tantrums. They've been practicing temper tantrums for 5 years.
Right.
So then you have to undo that.
Right.
And we all know how hard it is to break a habit.
Right.
So on the one hand, they're developing behaviors, they're developing and learning negative behaviors, and they're not getting the positive behaviors that they need.
Right.
And by the time they get to school age, when some of these kids have never been seen before by pediatricians or preschools or preschool teachers, and they get to kindergarten or they're 4, 5, 6, 7 years old before anybody sees them, and now you have 6 years worth of bad habits.
Right.
In addition to teaching them the good stuff, the new stuff.
And we're well, I don't know that we want to get into this, but we refer to them as bad habits, but they're adapted habits that fit them. If you're doing something, whether it's a good quote unquote good behavior or quote unquote bad behavior, if it's meeting your needs, you're going to continue to do it.
Exactly.
And so it may be a behavior that works at home, but it may not work in the school. And so now you're undoing all that.
And a temper tantrum is a good example. If you don't have any other way to get your point across, you're going to resort to those kinds of behaviors.
Absolutely.
So it's negative to us. It's adaptive for the child. Okay.
Yeah.
So first problem is
the law doesn't
Doesn't tell us what we have to do.
Right.
Okay. And so you can get away with doing very little.
Right.
As long as you have all the paperwork in order.
Right.
And you have if you say, I have a classroom for students with autism, they don't say what has to happen in that classroom.
Right.
You just have to say, I have a classroom.
Right.
And I can hire a first-year teacher who doesn't have any experience with autism,
right.
and not very much is going to happen.
And even if you have the best of intentions, even if you're not just trying to do the minimal,
right.
de minimis.
De minimis, I love that.
Even if you're not trying to do that, it still is difficult to know what to do in a classroom.
Even for experts.
Because the second problem is that most of your interventions are early, and the behaviors expand so much during school age that
there's so many things to do by the time they're 7 or 8.
Right. Yeah. But there's a third problem.
There's a third problem.
Right.
And that is?
And the third problem is that it costs a lot of money.
What they need are therapies. They need ABA. Some kids need ABA.
Applied behavior analysis.
Right. Some kids need occupational therapy, physical therapy, cueing, prompting, anger management,
Right.
Those therapists
social skills.
They're expensive.
Yeah.
That's what you have to do because you need intensive one-on-one or very small group. I mean, again, these are kids who don't interact very well socially, so it's hard to put together a group of kids who don't interact very well socially unless you're teaching them to interact socially. But if you want to do intensive therapy, it almost has to be one-on-one. Very expensive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we have to. I think we have to recognize these limitations so that we can then create a strategy or a plan to overcome some of those. We can't say, oh well, we have systems in place,
right?
So we're just going to go with that because obviously the systems aren't really working,
right?
And I think that education for education professionals is really important,
right? Because
I have certainly had many meetings with school administrators and school support and teachers to help them understand how my patient with autism is struggling and why they're struggling and why that behavior isn't intentional disobedience.
Right. Exactly.
It's rigidity. That's part of their
part of the disorder. Right. That's right. So he says, and at the end of this article, he says there are a couple of other things that we need to try to overcome. One of them he calls strategic silence. And I love the idea of strategic silence because I think we're all guilty of that every once in a while. Yeah. He said, just don't say anything. Yeah. This is a huge problem in our country. We have, 1 in 58 now kids with autism?
58 or 59, yeah.
Right. So it's a pretty high percentage of kids. The prevalence rates keep increasing. But none of us are really sure about how to deal with this, with all of the kids on the spectrum. We're okay with some. I think with the high functioning kids with high functioning, we're better with them. But we really don't know how to do this, number one. And we know that whatever we do is going to be very expensive. The farther down the spectrum you go, the more expensive it becomes.
Right.
Okay, and so there's some political will that is needed. And because we're not sure what to do, and because we know we don't have the resources, there's this what he calls this idea of strategic silence. Let's just not make promises that we can't keep. Let's not raise these issues, because if we raise the issues, we're going to raise expectations. If we raise expectations, then we might not be able to fulfill them. Right.
And that's the sort of the final major point that he makes, is that we have far too many unfulfilled promises.
Right.
And we've talked about this on many other podcasts, sort of the unintentional consequences and things like that, where you sort of develop a plan that looks awesome, that looks great,
right,
and then as soon as you start to implement it, you start seeing all of the cracks and all of the problems associated with that plan. And so so it leaves a lot of unfulfilled promises.
In 1975, when public law, when the Education of All Handicapped Children Act was first promulgated, it was never funded adequately.
Right.
Okay. We simply don't have the political will to fund these programs adequately. And one of the numbers he gives us is that if you use today's dollars, if you take how much money it would take to do special education the way the Education of All Handicapped Children Act said, it would take $40 billion to do that. What's allocated is $12 billion. And so we have these aspirational goals, but we never fund them adequately.
Right.
That happened again in 2000 with No Child Left Behind.
Right.
Because in order to get that through Congress, Bush had to depend on some Democrats, and he was particularly helped by Teddy Kennedy, who has always been an advocate of education. And Teddy Kennedy was near death. He was struggling with brain cancer at the time, but he came in and did the vote because he really believed in the concept of No Child Left Behind. We liked the idea.
The idea was good,
but it was underfunded from the very beginning.
Right.
Okay. It never had enough money behind it to do all the things that it said it was going to do. And I mean, you can have these aspirational goals, but you have to fund that adequately, and it was never funded adequately.
Yeah, and I think the sad thing is that as we're closing for today,
there's one more thing we want to say.
I know, is that even in the most recent budget, federal budget, education was cut again. It was cut by a good percentage, while of course defense and everything else was increased, and so it's a fascinating thing when you really sit down and look at the numbers and look at where the priorities are.
I'm going to take the gloves off for a minute here.
Oh no!
Okay.
See, that's why I said that we're almost done.
No, we're almost done, but we're talking about funding. If you want to do these programs, they have to be funded adequately. When the Florida lottery first came into existence, it was accepted. People weren't sure that they wanted gambling in Florida, but it was accepted because they said, we're going to use this money for education.
Right.
Okay, if you're going to use it for education, then I'll swallow my morality and I'll vote for it, is how many people felt. So let's say the Florida lottery generates $20 billion a year. I don't know. I have no idea what the numbers are.
20 billion's a lot.
Okay. Let's say 20 million.
Okay.
So the Florida lottery generates $100 million a year. Let's use a nice round number. That money was added to the state budget, and $100 million was taken out of the education budget. So it wasn't additional money, it simply replaced money. So we didn't get to 200 million. We still stayed at 100 million, it's just the money was coming from a different source. Okay. It's a bit of a shell game. When our president talks about cutting money out of budgets, he's cutting educational programs. There are politicians in our country today who want to cut. We've seen the Education of All Handicapped Children Act is funded at about 25%. State universities, we talk about a state university. The University of South Florida gets about 30% of its money from the state government. The rest is from tuition. It's underfunded. Everything in education is underfunded. And so if you want these programs to happen, and what everybody in education knows, if you want these programs to happen, they have to be funded adequately. So when politicians get up and they talk about saving money, they're not saving anything. It's a shell game. They're taking money from programs that need it. And I don't know where it's going, but it's not going to the programs that need it. And one of those programs is education. And you know what else?
Tell us.
Teachers in Florida can't strike. It's against the law to strike in Florida. It's illegal. You can lose your pension and lose your license if you strike in Florida if you're a teacher. So you can't do anything about it. Teachers' hands have been tied since the 1960s or 70s in the state of Florida. They can't. You've seen these teacher strikes in other places. Not going to happen in Florida. You're going to. It's against the law. Who writes those laws?
Not teachers.
Not teachers, not educators.
No.
So if you want to have these, now this is very important.
Are you going to put your gloves back on?
No, I think I'm going to be indignant about how taxes are cut, because when taxes are cut, I can tell you what gets cut. One of the things that gets cut is education. So before you cheer for a tax cut, remember what's being cut is education, fire, infrastructure, police. Those are all the government programs that get cut. Care for the elderly, care for the handicapped. So be careful about cheering for tax cuts, because they're not.
Yeah.
What McLaughlin talks in this article is do the right thing.
Right.
As a society, we should do the right thing.
Right.
Not what's cheap, let's not go to the lowest bidder. Remember Alan Shepard sat in that rocket, that first rocket, and said, as he's looking up at all these instruments, and said, the only thing about this is that the whole thing went to the lowest bidder.
Yeah.
And he's about ready to get blasted into space.
Yeah.
Let's not go to the lowest bidder. Let's do what's right. And this legal case, the Supreme Court decision, did you read that?
Andrew F. versus Douglas County School District.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Concluded that the school district...
That a school district must provide every child, regardless of disability, an opportunity to grow.
Right. And the court decreed that a Colorado special education program, which provided only minimum opportunity, was struck down. Right.
It was insufficient, yeah.
Right. That the verdict struck down a 1982 Supreme Court ruling that only required schools to have a floor of opportunity. Right. So there is some hope, because in 1982 we said, no, all you have to do is provide a minimum.
Right. In
2017, the court said, no, we really should be aiming higher than that.
Higher than the floor.
Hopefully there is some movement in the right direction, so that we do the right thing.
Right.
Okay. What kind of society do we want to be?
Exactly. All right. So that's it for today. We're going to talk tomorrow more about treatment, including some treatment considerations for schools and things like that. But before we head out, we're going to talk really quickly about the Coming Out of the Darkness, a concert of hope that's going to be at Theater Winter Haven. So that is here in Polk County, here in Central Florida. Theater Winter Haven on Thursday, May 24th at 7:30 p.m. And it's a program that's written and directed by Norm Small, and it features the best of Central Florida talent. And it's a program that's all about recognizing the importance of suicide prevention.
Right.
So it's a suicide prevention awareness program. All the proceeds are going to go to a local community mental health agency and the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. Right. If you are interested in getting more information, check out or contact theaterwinterhaven.com. It's THEATRE. Winter Haven, the British spelling for theater, winterhaven.com, and they will be able to get you some more information about that program. There's a cost for reserved seating in a special section, but they also have donations at the door if you want to show up day of. So
no reason not to go.
Absolutely.
Okay. And remember, it's the beginning of the Memorial Day weekend.
Right.
So it would be a wonderful way to start your holiday weekend.
Absolutely. So
hope to see you there.
That is it for today. Until next time, stay happy, stay healthy, and forget to be afraid. Thanks for sharing this episode of the Mental Breakdown and Psychreg podcast. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to follow us on Twitter and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you will find all of our previous podcasts and much more. We would be honored if you would become a patron through patreon.com, where any donation you can manage will go to the development and creation of more content. Just visit patreon.com/thementalbreakdown for more information. Thanks again for listening. Have an awesome day, and we look forward to being back in your feed tomorrow morning.